When you talk about directions coming from the presidency or the president's office,
yeah,
are you leaving out the states? Because
that's it. I'm looking at the entire executive setup, including both the states, because it's the same thing.
Because we do see the military, the police, and some other agencies go on this joint operation to curb, say, robbery.
Okay.
We see that predominantly. And who speaks up against that?
Speaks up? No.
Is that supposed to be?
Yes, that's supposed to be, because
by law?
By law, okay, the president, if you look at the constitution that you have before you, the president is supposed to ask the military. Okay,
no, I mean the states.
Within the states, whichever, because it has sweeping powers, okay, and it passes down, of course, to the executive arm at the state level. Now, the military is supposed to assist or aid, according to the constitution. The word used there is aid the police. In other words, the police is supposed to be in charge of these operations. So, excessive force is not supposed to be the norm.
So, for instance, now when we talk about JTF, it should have been more of the police with some form of assistance from the military.
Exactly. Now, under one condition, okay, Section 305, when the president calls for a state of emergency, then the chain of command might be affected, such that we now have the military in command. So, but if it is not a state of, of emergency, the police are the primary security agency that should be in charge of ISO operations within the country. The military are supposed to aid.
Let's talk on one other issue, which now that we're talking about JTF, which you have actually been carrying out research on rather, it has to do with the small arms and light weapons coming into the country. How do you relate that with the civilian JTF that have actually been assisting the military in fighting the insurgents in the northeast?
Now, like I said, most of the time the problems we have with security situations in the country is because of governance. It's not properly governed. Does the constitution of the country provide for some of these things? Of course, we have provision for volunteers. Volunteers can come if civilian volunteers are coming in order to aid security agencies, but they are supposed to be governed. There are certain rules of engagement that are supposed to be involved. Okay. Now, the activities of JTF in the north, especially, I would say that they have been carried out with a lot of brashness. Okay, the escalation of the crisis in the north, I can say that the 50 to 60% of it has been because of the approach of the joint task forces in quelling some of these activities. In 2009, for instance, if you look at the chain of events that resulted in the escalation of the situation, it's because of the approach of the JTF, which shouldn't be the case. So, whichever form in which we look at it, either civilians assisting the JTF or the JTF being constituted solely of security agencies and other military agencies, there are rules of engagement that are provided for. If you follow them, you get the results that should be obtained.
For armed civilians or assistance coming from civilians who ultimately were empowered by giving them some kind of arms.
As volunteers.
Yes, as volunteers. How do we ultimately retrieve them when maybe the onslaught or the battle is over?
Those are issues of disarmament. These people are not conscripted. They are volunteers. So, of course, there should be records of the weapons that have been given out to them. But we have the issue of corruption, like I said. Okay? We have the issue of corruption that comes up, that is the most obvious issue that we see in security issues. Are we going to be able to retrieve these weapons at the point of disarmament? Okay, because it's more or less like a conflict now. You are using civilians. Okay, now after you are through with this, will these weapons be retrieved? Because even some of these security agencies are outlets for arms proliferation, selling weapons.
Do you think that the civilian, are you saying in very clear terms that the JTF, the civilian JTF, were given arms to work with the...
Now, he said they were giving arms, and I said that if these people are giving arms, there has to be a system, there has to be a structure that will retrieve back these arms. But because of corruption, I can tell you, obviously, that at the end of the day, not all of these weapons will be returned back, which will create a problem for proliferation.
The surgeons, well, I think somehow, well, there have been a lull in some of these states. It means perhaps that the JTF, as well as those who are assisting the JTF, have actually been gaining some form of, should I say, upper hand. The arms that come into the country, or the arms that we see with the terrorists. You know, the last time we spoke, we decided to look at Libya and some other countries where we saw some strife and unrest before we saw some of these arms coming into the country. Has that been able to, have we been able to stop such coming in, or do we still have those small weapons coming into the country? Because for now, we have seen in the news how the JTF has been able to take over some of the hideouts of these insurgents. So we're hoping that by now we would have seen a complete stop, but it's not abated.
Well, proliferation of weapons follow, they go along the lines of demand and supply, economic principles. So it's
demand and supply.
Yes, it's not possible to stop them. As long as there is an incentive, there will be a demand, and then there will be source for proliferation. So as long as the incentive, okay, for reaching out for these weapons remain among these insurgents in the north, there will be provision of these weapons from different sources. Because within the country itself, we have a huge amount of weapons that are being produced by local craftsmen. And these weapons are high-grade weapons. AK-47 in all of its ramifications are being produced within the country, in Awka, in Damaturu, so many other places. So we have proliferation points within the country that can feed these insurgents comfortably. Now, other conflicts, especially in Libya and some other Maghrebian countries that have, created proliferation patterns all the way down here, have connection with some of these insurgents because of the terrorist connection that they have. Okay. Now, what essentially drives these weapons in the country are porous borders. We cannot police them. In fact, it's almost impossible to police them. We don't have the resources to police them. So those weapons will continue to come. But we look at arms control from a different perspective. Outside of controlling the weapons coming in, how can we control the incentive for demand? How can we stop them asking or reaching out for these weapons? And also, how can we clip the resources from which they use to get these weapons?
What kind of incentives are these? Incentive for demand?
For instance, violence. The violence against these people creates the incentive. Somebody slaps you, want to slap back. He shoots your wife, shoots your mother, you want to shoot the person back. So that's why we say there has to be constructive engagement when you are dealing with insurgents. Because that constructive engagement is part of arms control and post-conflict peace building. Because if there's no incentive, there's no need to get the weapons in the first place. So there are more and more incentives being created within the country for weapons. And as long as those incentives are created, small arms and light weapons are commodities of international value. Okay, so that they worth huge amounts of money. So people are selling and they are buying. Okay, so it will not stop. There is no way. As long as mankind exists, war will continue. Conflict.
Well, Bernard Fianca, yes. Lecturer, Department of History and International Relations, Redeemers University. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you very much.